In a quarterback class that is not all that strong again for the 2016 NFL draft, teams are going to be doing their due diligence and their homework and trying to see if they can find guys that will outperform the draft position. Maybe find those guys that are better prospects than maybe other people are keen to. Find those guys that are maybe slipping through the cracks just a little bit because of that desperation to find those guys that can hold up outside in man coverage as premier corners at the NFL level. Every team needs them. Every team wants them. The challenge is locating them, finding them, and then ultimately getting them, drafting them. So you look at a guy like Kendall Fuller coming from Virginia Tech. Even though he missed the lion's share of 2015 with the knee injury, I think a lot of teams are going back to his sophomore tape of 2014 and trying to determine whether or not this is a guy that has first-round pick potential, whether or not this guy can be a big-time corner at the NFL level. And I have to say, is when I watch Kendall Fuller on film, I see the NFL potential, but I'm not necessarily sure that it comes at the corner position. And let me explain what I mean. In terms of what I see from him in strengths and weaknesses, in terms of his strengths, I think he's a guy that's pretty quick. I mean, he's not like explosively quick, but he's pretty quick. I think he's got some pretty fluid movements. When I watch Kendall Fuller on film, I see a guy that is pretty smooth. It's just that smooth is a way to describe him, and that's how I look at him. He's a smooth guy. But you look at him too, I think he's got a good mind for the corner position at the NFL level. Sometimes that can come back and bite him a little bit because he can be a little susceptible to double moves. But I think he's got good awareness in terms of play recognition, some good play recognition skills, a guy that understands where he needs to be, understands what to do in terms of run support, which is an area that I think he's really good at, actually, is coming up and helping out in the running game. And he's only about 5'11", 190 pounds, so he's not a big dude, but he's pretty competent when it comes to run support. He's a pretty competent tackler as well. I wouldn't expect much less out of a defensive back coming out of the Frank Beamer system at Virginia Tech. Those defensive backs tend to be pretty good tacklers, and I think he most certainly is. A guy with pretty good ball skills as well. You know, somebody that you look at, you want a top-flight corner to be able to force turnovers, to have good ball skills. And Kendall Fuller has those ball skills. He can knock the ball away. He's a guy that doesn't have bricks for hands. He's a guy that can actually turn the ball over some, and you like that. A guy, you know, also coming out of Virginia Tech, has been well schooled in how to play on special teams. You know he can play special teams, and you know he's going to do just that. So at least, if nothing else, initially, as he's learning the nuances of playing at the NFL level, you know you've got a guy that can potentially contribute for you and maybe contribute for you in a big way as a special teamer, as a gunner, as somebody that can go down and protect on the outside. You know, he's got some traits there. He's somebody come crashing off of the edge in the kicking game as well. You know he can play special teams. After all, he played at Virginia Tech for college. He's also got some good, impressive NFL bloodlines, too. Teams like those guys that come from solid, proven NFL bloodlines. And while his family history doesn't indicate studs, there have been multiple brothers that have been NFL players. Vincent was a safety in the league for several years. Corey Fuller is still a wide receiver in the league. Kyle Fuller was a first-round pick by the Chicago Bears in 2014. So he comes from a family of guys that have managed to make it in the NFL level. Multiple brothers, in fact. So there would be nothing to indicate that Kendall wouldn't potentially be able to do the same thing. The biggest thing I like about him, though, is toughness. This is a guy that has played through multiple injuries, tried to play through multiple injuries. Just a guy that you feel like is going to go out there and give it his all. A guy that you feel like you're always going to get his best effort. A guy that is willing to play hurt, willing to try to play through injury. And I think that is something that is incredibly appealing for him amongst NFL teams and is perhaps one of his greatest, if not his greatest, redeeming quality. And you feel like that this is a guy that if he's going to have a hurt hand or a hurt ankle or a hurt shoulder or a bad back or, you know what, any number of different ailments or issues that NFL players will encounter, that he's going to do everything he can to be able to answer the bell every week on Sunday. And you got to like that. You like that toughness in a guy. But then I look at him and I say he's 5'11", 190 pounds, so he doesn't really have great size for the position. He has enough size, but he doesn't have great size. He doesn't have great length. He's not a very strong guy, which makes you concerned about his abilities to hold up in press man coverage. His press man technique is a bit lacking, frankly. I think another thing that's lacking for him, even when you looked at him on film in 2014, is his recovery speed. He's a guy, like I said, he's pretty fluid in his movements in general. Sometimes his footwork can get a little choppy. Sometimes he can have a little trouble turning his hips, but that's only some of the times. A lot of the times he feels like a very fluid player, and he will get up to his top speed quickly. The problem is his top speed I don't think is that particularly great. So I have some concerns about his ability to hold up outside man-to-man against quicker and faster wide receivers at the NFL level. Another thing, as I referenced a little bit earlier, when it comes to his mind for the game, sometimes he can put himself into some bad situations. He is really susceptible to double moves on the outside. It's something you saw in his film time after time in 2014, and it's something you saw in the Ohio State game, how badly Michael Thomas burned him on the outside in that opening game of the 2015 season. Sometimes I will say for a guy also with the good ball skills that he has, he can really struggle locating the ball. It's ironic. When he finds a ball, he's good at doing things with the ball, batting away passes, picking off the ball. But he really, in coverage, when he's having a turn and run, he does a really poor job of locating the football, which makes me concerned about his ability to hold up outside because, again, he's a guy that's worried about his long-range speed. So instead of being able to naturally turn and make a play on the ball, he's trying to play the wide receiver. He's looking at the wide receiver, which could mean a propensity for getting flagged for pass interference at the next level. Also, durability, I think it's got to be a major concern. You talk about a guy that missed the majority of the 2015 season with a knee injury. You talk about a guy that also had a wrist injury that he played through in 2014. It seems like somehow, some way, Kendall Fuller always has an injury. It's always hurt in some way. So you really have to be concerned about investing potentially a first-round pick in this guy, because of the fact that you have to be concerned, even with the toughness that he demonstrates, how much are you going to be able to count on him? How consistently is he going to find his way on the football field? And again, I think these are legitimate questions that will have to be answered, and only time will tell whether or not he can actually answer the bell consistently week in and week out, regardless of if he wants to or not. When I look at an NFL comparison for him, in some ways, I look at his brother, and it seems like a lazy comparison. They're related, they went to the same school, but there were some similar traits there. Now, Kyle, I think, was a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger, but a lot of similarities there in certain ways. Good ball skills, but sometimes not the most natural in terms of locating the ball. Good awareness, but at times susceptible to double moves on the outside. Guys that are, understandably solid special teams players coming from Frank Beamer's system at Georgia Tech, guys that can make plays again on the ball, guys that are willing and able run supporters with good initial quickness and some fluidity in their movements. I do think his brother is a pretty solid comparison, although I think Kyle has more overall upside as an NFL corner than Kendall does because of Kyle's superior size and strength. When I look at Kendall Fuller, though, the thing that jumps out at me, when I look at the strengths and I look at the question marks, we look at him as a corner. I really, really wonder if he isn't maybe better suited to play free safety at the NFL level, and here's why I say that. Good initial quickness, a good mind for the game, willing and able in run support, a solid tackler, a guy that when he's able to, look straight ahead has really good ball skills, a tough nose type of dude, but not the longest or strongest. Questions about how he'd hold up in man coverage on the outside with both his press technique and his recovery speed, which can get him into trouble. He can be susceptible to double moves. When I look at those strengths and those weaknesses, I see a guy that actually could be a really good free safety at the NFL level, more so than a corner at the NFL level. That's just my opinion. Now, sure, playing him at the safety position, it would be a transition for him to learn how to play more of a center field, because he's not going to be a strong safety. He's not big enough or physical enough for that, for sure. And for a guy with durability questions already, you could be really rolling the dice and playing Russian roulette, trying to ask him to play the strong side. He'd have to be a free safety. But I actually think he could be a good one. I think he has several traits, especially when it comes to his willingness and run support, his ability to play the ball when the play is in front of him and he can actually see it develop, his quickness and his fluidity of movement, his toughness. I look at a guy that I think could be a free safety and a pretty good one, actually, at the NFL level. So when it comes to me evaluating him as a prospect, it's kind of a double-edged sword. As a corner, maybe a second to third round pick. Because I saw quite a bit of flaws even in his 2014 film, and I saw some serious things that concern me about his ability to stick outside at the NFL level. But when I'm evaluating him maybe as a free safety, I see a guy that is for sure a second-round pick and maybe a high second-round talent, And a guy that I wouldn't be surprised if a team took a gamble on late in round one, they probably would take the gamble on him more as a corner. But I might be a little more willing to take a late round one gamble on him as a safety. I'd feel a lot better on taking a round two gamble on him as a safety than I would as a corner. So in my evaluations of him, I could evaluate him as a corner, but I think his best NFL position and the best thing you do for his draft stock, honestly, is to transition to safety. And I wouldn't be surprised if somebody drafted him and maybe they did try him at corner initially, but they eventually converted him to a safety or even made him a safety right from the get-go. Because again, when I look at a lot of the things, I'm real concerned about the lack of recovery speed and the ability to locate the ball when he's playing a man coverage on the outside. Makes me think that he's better suited to play with him being able to face straight ahead and with the play in front of him where he can actually see what develops, which plays into more of his strengths. I think Kendall Fuller is a safety at the NFL level, and I think he could actually be a pretty solid one if given the opportunity and put in the right situation where he could kind of be that roaming center fielder, but at times you bring him up in run support. When you start putting him into a lot of man coverage situations, I think that's an area where he could be susceptible, and that's an area that he could be exploited and taken advantage of at the NFL level.